Okay, I think this is again John Rumpler at Environment America Research and Policy Center. I think we're ready to get started.
Well, thank you so much, John. This is Nate Boone. I'm a program officer with the William Penn Foundation in the Watershed Protection Grant Center. Excited to be sharing this content and to just offer some introductory remarks as we get ready to see the incredible wealth of information that's presented by this new tool that Environment America has developed with its partners, and hear about some of the ways that we can apply the insights from this tool to help advance our shared interest in protecting and restoring clean water and healthy ecosystems across the entire Delaware River watershed. So again, I mentioned I'm Nathan Boone with the William Penn Foundation. We're a philanthropic entity, a family foundation based in Philadelphia, but as part of our mission, we're very much invested in water quality and environmental outcomes across the entire Delaware River watershed. So that's a 13,500 square mile watershed. It's 4 states, 2 EPA regions, hundreds of municipalities, and hundreds more of different sources of pollution and potential stress on this system. So when we're looking at a system this large and how we can support smart interventions that increase protection and reduce pollution, it becomes really essential to understand as much as we can about the various inputs and pressures on the system. And this is what brought us to this idea, in partnership with Environment America, brought us to this idea of cumulative impact. And I think the best way I can introduce this idea of cumulative impact to you all is by drawing a comparison with public health and toxicology. Some of you may be familiar with this idea of combined exposures. There are contaminants, toxics in our environment that are regulated, that we know aren't safe for us, right? And the systems, Food and Drug Administration, EPA, others, are putting systems in place to ensure that we're not exposed to any single contaminant in excess of what the science shows is an unsafe level, right? But we also know that for things like carcinogens, cancer-causing contaminants, or contaminants like endocrine disruptors, that different chemical substances, different threats, different sources of exposure can combine in unpredictable ways. So even when we're exposed to a contaminant at a safe level, contaminant A at a safe level, what happens when we're also composed to contaminant B at also a theoretically safe level, contaminant C, contaminant D, contaminant E, and these contaminants combine, right? They combine and interact with each other, and they compound one another's effects and produce a combined exposure that is in fact unhealthy, unsafe. So in the case of the Delaware River watershed, we're really thinking about a system that needs to be treated in the same way we think about public health and toxic exposures. We have a system that needs to be treated as a whole body, a complete system. We need to be understanding multiple threats to water quality within the Delaware and how those multiple threats compound each other and lead to a cumulative impact that's cause for concern. Now in our system, right, we've got regulatory frameworks, we've got requirements for permitting. We need to secure a permit for pollution, and these are supposed to be the mechanism by which society is addressing, much, certainly not all, but much of this threat. If you want to introduce a new contaminant into the system or a new source of pollution, you need to secure a permit, and ostensibly that permit ensures, and that permitting process ensures that the dose, right, the level of contamination doesn't exceed what the science shows is an acceptable level. But again, as we look at a wider and increasingly wide and diverse set of contaminant sources, from point sources and permanent dischargers to non-point sources that come from 1,001 different sources across the landscape, The situation is becoming increasingly complex, and the ability of any single permitting system to adequately address the environmental threats from a single source of pollution or a single driver of development, well, that ability becomes increasingly inadequate. This is only compounded by the fact that the Delaware, as you know, in thinking about the Delaware, we think about it as an entire system, but a system comprised of multiple other tributaries, multiple other sub-watersheds that are themselves also self-contained systems that we need to be evaluating and understanding if we're, again, going to achieve our goal of clean and abundant water for people and nature. So again, the precursor for engaging with any single permit system is getting that better at any geographic level, whole basin, tributary, small headwater stream. The precursor to that is really getting a better handle on what are the threats to water quality already, what is already occurring in this system. And that's why I'm excited to introduce Doug O'Malley, the Executive Director of New Jersey Environment, or excuse me, Environment New Jersey, who, along with others on the Environment America team, have been putting together this incredible tool to help address just that issue, putting together a more complete picture of what is occurring at various levels across the watershed in this, this frame of cumulative impacts. So without further ado, I give you Doug O'Malley.
Thank you so much, Nathan. This is Doug O'Malley, the director with Environment New Jersey.
We seem to have lost Doug for a momentary audio technical difficulty there. Oh, Doug, are you back?
Okay, I'm going to call in.
Doug, we can hear you now. But not now.
I think he was having trouble with the computer audio, so he's going to dial in with his phone. Sorry, folks.
Mute me on the phone. That'd be great. Good, great. So apologies for the technical difficulties there. I guess I just wanted to start off by obviously thanking Nathan and the whole I wanted to thank Tony.
Hey, Doug, I think it's still coming through from your computer and we're having a hard time hearing you. You're cutting in and out.
I apologize, everyone. Again, this is John Rumpler with Environment America Research and Policy Center. If I can, just take a moment to paraphrase what I believe Doug was about to tell us was, just to quickly remind us of two things. One is why we care so deeply about the Delaware River Basin. It's obviously the drinking water source for more than 15 million people in the region. It's an incredible opportunity for swimming and fishing and wildlife and recreation. It's really a core part of our community here in the whole region. And that is why the second thing I think that Doug was going to say is that he at Environment New Jersey, along with the rest of our federation, has been working hard for a number of years with many allies who have joined us today to help protect and defend the Delaware. And, you know, just some examples of some things that we've done most recently. I think folks know that there's been action at the Delaware River Basin Commission, that many of the participants on the phone here, along with Environment New Jersey and Penn Environment and others, worked to convince the commission to have a ban on fracking, to propose a ban on fracking, and working to make sure that fracking waste stays out of the watershed. But going back quite a ways, one of the visionary things that Environment New Jersey did was work with then DEP Commissioner Lisa Jackson to get protection for over 900 miles of streams, rivers, and reservoirs under the state's Category 1 program. And the reason I bring that up is I think it brings us to where many of us are thinking about our plans for protecting and restoring the Delaware River watershed in 2019, and that is to use these powerful tools, these anti-degradation tools and other designation tools, as one of the key things that we can do to protect the Delaware River and to reduce some of the pollution threats that we've found here in this map. So Doug, I don't know if your audio is back, but
It is, John. So hopefully folks can hear me now. So apologies on that. And I think the reference to the work on Category 1 protections, anti-degradation protections, is through the Clean Water Act. In New Jersey, it's Category 1. In Pennsylvania, it's exceptional value. In New York and Delaware, they also have those designations under the Clean Water Act. And to go back even farther, we've had a history of working to protect the Delaware River watershed. Even in the 1970s, working to stop the Talk Island Dam project, which was, would have been catastrophic for the watershed and specifically for the gap. I also wanted to reference, the work, that has happened over the course of the last decade on the federal level, which Sean has been, highly engaged in, as well as other allies across the watershed, and that's the effort on the federal level through EPA. Through the Waters of the United States and EPA's Clean Water Rule, to protect all waterways of the United States, not just navigable waterways. As we say, just because you can't put a boat on it does not mean that it's important. And I think the work that we've seen on the EPA Clean Water Rule, the work we've historically seen on protecting waterways around not only New Jersey but around the watershed, we try to kind of reflect that totality of thinking, as Nathan was talking about the cumulative impacts. We try to reflect that thinking in the map, because the idea of this map is not just a static document. And I'll turn it back to John in just a minute or two to kind of run through the tools in the map. And then I also just want to recognize the outstanding work of the Frontier Group, and specifically Tony Dutzek, our senior researcher and deputy director, as well as Alana Miller. They spent 18 months on this project, and the ability to kind of look at the watershed in a wholesale way, and to be able to look at the stressors that we have seen in not just the entire watershed but our sub watersheds, it really is eye-opening. And I know we may have some frequent flyers on the phone right now. I had a chance to give a presentation at the Coalition for the Delaware Watershed down in Cape May just earlier this week. And I think for the participants in some of our earlier webinars or in that particular presentation, it's very clear that light bulbs go off and people, look at the data and, kind of ask, well, what more can we do with this? How do we let more people know about it? And so our hope is that this is kind of an ongoing project. And I think one of the reasons why, as Nathan was referencing, why this work is so important now is that, a generation after the Delaware was considered to be a dead zone, we're seeing our true rebirth in the watershed. And whether you're in a community like a Bethlehem or Easton, or you're more downriver in Camden and Camden's waterfront, or in Burlington City that's working to reclaim its waterfront, there's a clear desire to try to take what is the public and should be used by the public as for recreational uses and for drinking water and for fishing and swimming, that those uses are being rediscovered. And our hope is that with the map, we can allow the public to kind of engage and figure out what are the stressors that are surrounding their water quality. So with that, let me turn it fully over to John to discuss, what kind of went into the creation of the map.
Thanks, Doug. I want to just give a brief overview of some of the findings of all of the data sources that Frontier Group pulled together, so we can see the amazing, pollution challenges that we face as we try to ensure that all of these waterways are safe for swimming, safe for fishing, safe sources of clean water and clean drinking water. There are many sources of pollution in the Delaware River. We thought for the purposes of our research that it was helpful to categorize them, break them into 4 categories: runoff pollution, fossil fuels and mining, industrial pollution, and sewage. And let me just start with runoff pollution. I know this is a somewhat complicated issue and it's pervasive across the entire watershed. We're really dealing with sort of 2 different kinds of runoff, right? One is agricultural runoff from crops as well as livestock operations. And then 2 is, of course, that in our more developed areas, we have a lot of impervious surface. And so the problem is that when it rains, as we saw dramatically and tragically in the Carolinas recently, the water has nowhere to go. And so our lands are flooded, our watersheds get a tremendous amount of runoff pollution and so forth and so on. So those are really 2 separate parts of the runoff pollution problem. What we've tried to do with this slide that you see in front of you here is to just give you a sense of some of the big picture across the watershed, how serious some of these problems are. So with respect to runoff pollution, we're talking about more than 500,000 pounds of nitrogen runoff just in the headwaters of the Tulpehocken Creek each year. So that's just one small creek. Now imagine if we look at that throughout the entire watershed, and you can just imagine the staggering amount of nitrogen runoff from agriculture coming into the entire watershed. It's a huge problem that we need to deal with. And then just another example of the urban developmental runoff, just noting that in the Philadelphia Schuylkill subwatershed, that 60% of that area is covered by impervious surface. So again, the stormwater runoff problem is mainly a function in many ways of that impervious surface and the lack of the water to go anywhere other than to our rivers, lakes, and streams. So that's a problem there. And if you look at the rest of these numbers, I don't think I want to go through every single one of the numbers on the slide. You can see them. I'll just say I think it's pretty alarming: 126 Superfund sites, 250 sewage treatment plants. That's an awful lot. And I think this gets to what Nathan was saying before about the cumulative impacts. If we look at that nitrogen and then we look at the oil and gas and then we look at the industrial pollution, the toxics from the industrial pollution combined with some of the toxics from pesticide runoff, from agriculture, what are the synergistic effects on our health from there? The nitrogen from agriculture, the nitrogen from ordinary runoff combined with the nitrogen from sewage overflows. Again, you can see a cumulative impact there as well. So those are some of the things that we've tried to capture here. I do want to just say, if you look to the left side of your screen, and you'll see kind of the zoomed out version of our map with the watershed, you'll see all those little red areas on the map. Those are designated impaired waterways. And of course, that's the bad news, is that we've got a lot of waterways that already have been determined to be too polluted for uses like fishing and swimming or other things that we have decided we want these watersheds used for. The good news is, of course, there's a lot of white space there too on the map, a lot of places that are still clean that we can work to preserve and protect. But of course, we've got to push back on this pollution and get it reduced if we're ever going to have a hope of restoring the impaired waterways and preventing pollution in the places that are clean. So let me just then spend a minute going to, well, what are some of the policy solutions, some key recommendations that we have for restoring and protecting the Delaware River watershed? The first, I think, is one that Doug just mentioned, is let's keep our clean waterways clean. These protective designations under the anti-degradation provisions of the Clean Water Act, like Category 1 in New Jersey, we should use these more robustly across the watershed to ensure that our pristine rivers and streams remain that way for generations to come. Secondly, in all of the impaired waterways or other places that are polluted, even if they haven't been declared impaired yet, we need to drive pollution by reductions by showing policymakers that these are places that people are swimming and fishing. They ought to be treated as such so that they are safe for those activities. And then thirdly is just all of the common sense solutions that we know are going to be needed to transition away from polluting activity. So let's prevent runoff pollution through better design and green infrastructure, use of buffer zones. Let's move to sustainable agriculture where we have less runoff pollution and less pesticides to begin with. Let's move industry away from these toxic chemicals that Nathan was mentioning in the beginning and shift them to safer alternatives so we have less of these industrial discharges of toxic chemicals that may have cumulative and synergistic effects. And then, of course, at the federal level and at the state level, we need stronger enforcement of our laws, not just having these designations on the books, but actually going after polluters, implementing pollution reduction plans, and certainly not, as Doug alluded to earlier, weakening our core clean water laws at the federal or state level. And then finally, I know that many participants in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative have been involved in efforts at on-the-ground restoration, or perhaps working with localities on repairing aging sewage infrastructure. These things take money. They take public funds for us to be able to buy up land for conservation and prevent runoff pollution that way, to be able to restore and protect our waterways. So robust funding, we think, is a key part of the picture. So in sum, we know that the Delaware River watershed is facing pollution of a wide range and types from many different sources, that there are cumulative impacts of this pollution throughout the watershed. But the good news is, A, there are still several streams and creeks and other rivers that are not yet polluted. Let's save them while we can, using the tools that we have under the Clean Water Act. And the second piece of good news is that we do have other tools to drive pollution reductions and reduce these overall cumulative impacts. So without further ado, let me take us to the main event. Let me have Tony Dutzik from Frontier Group walk us through the actual map and how we can use it to understand these challenges and to advocate for some of these key recommendations that we need moving forward.
All right, thank you, John. As John said, my name is Tony Dutzik. I'm Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst at Frontier Group. We are a nonprofit research and public policy organization that provides information and ideas to build a cleaner, healthier, and more democratic America. And I want to sincerely thank you all for joining and taking the time to be with us today. For the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a quick tour of the interactive map, and then I'll be available afterwards for any questions. The motivation behind the map is that we all want to make the waters of the Delaware River Basin clean for fishing, swimming, for drinking water supply, and other uses. But we know that there are multiple sources of pollution that hinder us from achieving that goal, as well as inherently dangerous activities that take place within the basin that risk damaging our waterways in the event of a natural or human-caused disaster. The map we've developed unites information from more than a dozen data sets to provide residents of the Delaware River Basin, as well as advocates and community leaders, a new tool for understanding the threats facing the basin's waterways. We also think that the map can help illustrate what it will take for us to achieve the goal of protecting or restoring our waterways so that to make them safe for fishing and swimming. So let's take a walk through how to use the map. There are a few ways to get started. For a quick primer, you can click on the How to Use This Map button on the top bar, which is one of several features of the map that provides a pop-up box with more information to help you navigate. Or you can dive right in by navigating the map in one of three ways. First, you can type an address into the search bar. In this case, we will choose a iconic Delaware River Basin location, Philadelphia City Hall. And when you do that, it will show you the location that you've selected, the local watershed in which it's located, as well as all of the watersheds upstream of that location. And we think that this is important because it demonstrates to everyone who uses the map that the waterways of the Delaware River Basin are in fact part of an interconnected system. A second way to navigate the map is by selecting a water utility from the drop-down box on the left. We're going to go slightly upriver to Trenton. And again, when you do that, it indicates the watershed or watersheds that supply the source water for that utility, as well as the upstream watersheds. Now, it's important to note that the map only lists those utilities that draw water from surface water sources. There are some water utilities in the basin that draw their water from groundwater, and those are not included on the map. A final way to navigate is simply by using the pan and zoom tools to visit a part of the watershed that you are particularly interested in. Now, the initial view, as John said, of the map shows waterways that are illustrated with red lines. These are waterways that have been assessed by the various states to be impaired for designated beneficial uses such as fishing, swimming, or drinking water. To dive in on what pollution challenges you might face in making one particular waterway safe for fishing or swimming, we can take an example of looking at a section of the Delaware River main stem above Philadelphia. By clicking on the waterway, you're provided with a pop-up box with more information, and in some states, this includes a link to an EPA website that provides more information about that particular waterway. Now, one frustration that we had in doing this map is that while the states update their impaired waters lists every 2 years, not every state updates the geographic information for those lists every 2 years. And so for some of the states, the listings are from previous assessment cycles. But when we click on the waterway segment, we're taken to an EPA report that tells us a lot more information about that particular waterway. It tells us what the designated beneficial uses for the waterway are, whether the waterway is attaining those uses or impaired, and then also the sources of pollution that might be causing an impairment. That information then enables us to go back to the map and explore some of the potential sources of pollution that may be contributing to the problem. All of the sources of pollution that I'm about to mention can be navigated using the bar on the left-hand side, which indicates various layers of information. And one source of pollution that we might look at is pollution from the sewage system, from municipal stormwater treatment plants, as well as combined sewer overflows. Now, it's important to note that sewage treatment plants play a critical role in keeping pollution out of the Delaware. And the region has invested billions of dollars in improvements to sewer systems that have delivered tremendous results in terms of improved water quality. Still, even today, antiquated facilities continue to be a significant source of nutrients and other pollutants. The map shows both the location of sewage treatment plants, as well as information on discharges to waterways that are reported to the US EPA, as well as, where available, information on the location of combined sewer overflows and some measure of their impact. Another source of pollution that we might explore are industrial facilities that are permitted to discharge to waterways of the basin under the Clean Water Act. By clicking on the industrial dischargers layer, we're taken to a set of facilities for which we've aggregated information where available on conventional discharges of pollutants such as nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as releases of toxic substances as reported under the Federal Toxics Release Inventory. In the case of toxics, we use the EPA's Risk Screening Environmental Indicators Hazard Measure, which weights toxic discharges based on the toxicity of substances released, and allows us to compare the toxicity of those releases in the basin with those from other facilities nationwide. The map also allows users to assess how a local creek, stream, or river that we might want to make safe for fishing or swimming is affected by regional pollution problems such as runoff pollution. We're going to navigate now to a different part of the basin. And if we know, for example, that Tulpehocken Creek, which flows into the Schuylkill River, is impaired for aquatic life due to nutrient runoff from agricultural pollution, then the map can give us a reading on potential sources of nutrient pollution from agriculture using the agricultural runoff layers. In this case, we can not only see sources of nitrogen loading from the local watershed in which the creek exists, but also from upstream watersheds that might be contributing to the problem. It's important to note here that the data on agricultural and urban runoff come from sources that were developed specific to the Delaware River Basin by the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel and by researchers at Shippensburg University. And as I mentioned, the urban runoff layer, to the extent that the pollution problems in a particular river or stream are supported or caused or made worse by urban runoff, that the urban runoff layer tells you a bit about the impervious surface cover of those watersheds in order to provide a clearer idea of where we may need to focus attention in terms of doing green stormwater infrastructure and otherwise reducing the flow of runoff into those rivers and streams. Now, not all threats to our waterways are immediately apparent. Some inherently dangerous activities, such as legacy sources of pollution, pose serious threats in the event of a natural or human-caused disaster. And as John mentioned earlier, one only needs to read the headlines about the environmental disasters following in the wake of Hurricane Florence in North Carolina to understand the importance of taking these threats seriously. So the map includes a couple of layers that provide important perspective on those types of serious threats. One is the fossil fuels and mining layer, which provides information about facilities that produce, transport, or refine fossil fuels in the basin, as well as active and abandoned mines. Now, these types of facilities may not discharge a great deal on a daily basis, but they could be the cause of a serious problem in the event that affects our ability to preserve fishing and swimming in a waterway in the case of an accident or a disaster, often with catastrophic consequences. And we've seen this in the Delaware Basin historically with the impact of oil spills in the Delaware River on fish and birds. Now, the pop-up box for each of these facilities provides additional information about that facility, its name, and its role in the system. And one thing that I find particularly intriguing about this layer of the map is that it shows the interconnections between facilities that process fossil fuels and those the pipelines and rail lines that transport those fuels across the basin to those facilities. So again, it is a useful tool for illustrating, I think, to the public and decision makers that many of these systems really are connected and that they do lead to cumulative impacts that we need to address. We can use another layer of the map to see the location of hazardous waste sites regulated under the federal Superfund program or under state hazardous waste programs. And again, as with the impaired waters layer, this layer shows the location and name of the facility, what that facility does, and also in many cases provides a link to additional information about that facility, showing us both more about the environmental laws under which it is regulated, its enforcement history, and other aspects of its performance. In short, the interactive map shows that when it comes to water quality in the Delaware River Basin, everything is connected. By bringing together more than 5,000 data points on water pollution threats from more than a dozen sources, as well as information on impaired waterways, it shows the risks and dangers posed by allowing routine pollution of our waterways and the potential threat posed by inherently dangerous activities within the watershed. As we seek to make all the waterways within the basin safe for fishing and swimming, The map provides a bird's eye view of the many activities we have permitted that are currently putting our waterways at risk, and represents an urgent call to limit future impacts on the pristine waterways that remain. Now, let's talk for a moment about what is not on the map. There are some threats to water quality in the basin for which there either isn't good publicly available information or that are simply hard to visualize on a map. We don't know much, for example, about contaminants of emerging concern like household chemicals and pharmaceuticals, or about the specific location of factory farms that store manure on site. Information on pesticide use and runoff is also difficult to track and also to depict on a map. For all the information that is included on this map, there is also a large part of the story that the map doesn't tell. In addition, we did not set out to show what is already going right in the Delaware River Basin, and there is a big story to tell there. That includes the waterways that already have protected designations, or those that are the highest priority for additional protection. Telling that part of the story is something that we can imagine incorporating alongside the data on pollution threats and future iterations of the map. And again, it is a very important part of the story to tell. Lastly, it's important to note that the quality of the information on the map depends on the quality of information available in the original government sources we used to build it. Throughout the process of building the map, we ran into issues with outdated and inaccurate geographic data, unusual outliers, and inconsistencies in how states report information to federal databases. So while we hope that this map provides residents of the basin with useful information on local water quality threats, it is also very likely to raise questions that only improved environmental information can answer. In addition to the map, we've included a few other resources on the website to help users make sense of the information presented and take the next steps toward further involvement. Clicking on the Solutions button will take you to Environment America's Delaware River Watershed page. And at the bottom of that page, you'll find a series of 4-page fact sheets with more information on each of the categories of threats depicted on the map, summary data, and suggestions on how to use the map to explore water quality challenges, as well as policy recommendations. In the near future, we'll be planning to add to the website a summary report that describes some of the lessons learned from the map and presents a series of more detailed policy recommendations. For those who are interested in taking a deeper dive into the sources and methods we used in production of the map, there's a PDF with full documentation for the data used. I want to close by thanking the many people who helped make this project a reality, including the William Penn Foundation, our team at Frontier Group, and our partners at Environment America, as well as the many people in the basin, including quite likely some of you on this call, who provided ideas and feedback during the process of developing this tool. I hope this has been informative and that the map will be a useful source of information for you and residents of the Delaware River Basin as we seek to make the basin cleaner and healthier for its people. So thank you.
Tony, thanks so much for that terrific presentation on this amazing tool that you've helped us bring out to the Delaware River community. What I'd like to do, I'm sure that I see we've already got some questions in the chat box, which is great, and there might be a wide-ranging discussion and a number of places we could go. Let me suggest this. What I'd like to do at first is to just make sure that we use this moment for people to be able to understand how to use the map. So if I can first get any questions that people have about the tutorial that Tony just went through, about just literally how to use the map as it is right now. I understand that several of you have great ideas about how we could expand the map or enhance the map or maybe add features that would help us make a better case for protecting pristine waterways. But if we can just start with questions about how to make sure you're able to use what we've created already, that would be just great. And I'm just looking in the chat box here. There's a question from Josh Van Brackle. Are the GIS layers used in the map available for deeper dives and analysis?
This is Tony. Yes, so we have not posted the GIS layers separately, but we do have them and are very willing to share them with anyone who is interested. I would note also that all of these layers are based on public sources, so some of them may be available in other areas as well. But you can certainly feel free to reach out. And I'm realizing that I think that there will be. I'm not sure if there will be a slide at the end with my contact information, but you can certainly feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to share with you any of the layers.
And then again, I'm just skipping around to questions that are purely about how to use the map at first. Brittany Musolino asks, is there a way to download the information or look at the reports you showed?
Yes. So, again, with relation to the GIS layers, we have not posted. I think the suggestion of posting those to the website in a separate area is a good one, and we'll figure out if we can do that. There was one other question about methodology and sources. So there was a question about how to access that information. So I believe that I'm still sharing. At the bottom right-hand corner of the map, there is a button for the methodology that will take you to the PDF document that has the methodology and sources within it. And for each of those, we've provided description of both what is on the map from that particular source, any sources of information that we believe may be missing, as well as the detailed methodology, both in terms of how we obtained the data for the map and any manipulations that we made to the data subsequently. So for those of you who are looking to take a deeper dive and to play with some of the data yourself, certainly we can make the GIS layers available to you, and then the methodology being a good place to dive in and look at things for more detail.
We have a question from Andrew Holmes and Kelly Jacobs asking, is the watershed info from SRAT?
Yes, so the nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment data are all from SRAT. That is correct. The urban runoff data, the impervious surface data is based on an analysis of the high-res land cover data that has been being developed by Shippensburg University with assistance from the University of Vermont Spatial Lab. So that is based off of that data source as well.
Terrific. Again, I see that in an encouraging way, some people are asking questions, sort of jumping ahead to, hey, what can I do, or how can we use this data and so forth, which is fantastic. I just do want to make sure, are there any other questions about just how to use the map before we get to some of those more strategic questions?
John, it does seem as though there are one or two other questions that I can pick up related to just what the data on the map represent.
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah, so one question was, did I say that the drinking water layer only represents sources relying on surface water? And yes, that is correct.
The other thing I would just encourage is, as people come away from our webinar today, I would invite you, if you're able to find a spare 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour in your schedule over the next few days, please dive into the map and play around with it. Tinker around, look in your own. If you're from Brandywine Creek, go look at the data for Brandywine Creek. If you're in another sub-watershed, go look and see what's there for you. Tinker around with it, get your thoughts back to us on the map, questions back to us. We want this to be a living tool for the entire Delaware River watershed initiative community. We just had one question about the map layers.
Sure. So there was a question of what the brown and green coloring to the west are. Those are maps of the Marcellus and Utica shale layers. which are obviously very key discussion in the Delaware River Basin at the moment. The second question about is there funding or plans to update the newer 303D streams or to maintain layers? We do have a small amount of funding to do maintenance on the map, but we certainly will be, there is a tremendous amount of data here, so it's a lot to keep up with. I also just wanted to speak to something that I think is coming up in the questions in the chat box a lot, which is, I think for anyone who has done this kind of work, both, it is a very time-consuming endeavor to get all of these data sets to talk with one another, and also, as you can see, it is a fairly busy map. So we've gotten many suggestions from folks about additional layers and additional features that we could add to the map, and we've had many more discussions internally about things that we would love to see here. All of those things, I would encourage folks to continue to suggest those things because we do really want to hear, not only questions about what exists on the map and its usefulness, but also about places that this might go. But just, for folks to understand that, that we weren't able to incorporate everything in the first crack. And so we'd very much like to be in a conversation with people about what we might be able to do with this next.
Doug, if your audio is back with us, it seems like there are a few questions here that are about local opportunities for advocacy. And I'm wondering if you wanted to take some of those.
Sure. So I'm on. I'm focused. I was looking at the data questions. I don't know if I'm actually seeing the
Great presentation. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
John, can you read maybe one?
Yeah,
of those
sure. So, for example, I'm sorry about that, Doug. So, Carl DuPault asks, any thoughts about what local communities and volunteers can do?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a great question, Carl, and I'm really excited that you joined, and I think this is relevant for really everyone that's on the phone. So I think the most basic thing here is that we want to be able to shout this from the rooftop. So to be able to share this tool not only kind of with your staff, but also with your constituency, allies, and your membership, I think is kind of the first and simplest, and in many ways the most powerful thing to do, because we want people to use the map, go to your hometown, go to your watershed, and try to kind of connect the line. And I think this is one of the other key things here is that once you kind of, get past the gee whiz factor of, you can kind of see, all these data sets within your community or within your sub-watershed, this ideally should be a tool that can be used at the local and regional level. When we're talking about permitting, we're talking about cumulative impact. When I was down in Cape May, the community that I focused on was Bordentown, which is just south of Trenton. And we were actually looking at the Bordentown Sewage Authority. And, several years prior, there had been a proposal to build a sewage treatment facility in the Crosswicks Creek. So not right in Bordentown, but certainly within the sub-watershed. And, this is the sort of data we want to make it easier for community organizations and local activists and citizens, when they're at the local level and trying to make an argument on cumulative stressors. This allows you to do this, pretty easily. And so I think, we obviously want people to use this tool, but we also want them to think about how they can use this in their work.
Great. Repite K2 from CAC asks, any recommendations developed on dealing with damage from pipeline construction?
I think the quick thought on that, and that's also a great question. One of the things that Tony referenced here is the interconnection of fossil fuel infrastructure. And if you look at the methodology, which I certainly recommend that folks do, Tony and his team use Frac Tracker to look at the impacts, to look at the mapping of the Penn East pipeline. Obviously, on the Pennsylvania side, there's Mariner East, And sadly, there's almost too many pipelines to name. The map, of course, doesn't actually reference, the impact of HGD drilling. But what the map does do is allows you to see, by looking at the planned route of pipelines like Mariner East and pipelines like Penn East or South Jersey Gas, to look at the impaired waterways that if they don't intersect, that they could impact. The Penn East example, I think, is especially telling because we, as John referenced, worked with a set of allies, including then Stony Brook Millstone, now the Watershed Institute, to work to upgrade 16 waterways in Mercer and Hunterdon County in the early 2000s under both the McGreevey and Corzine administration. Those waterways are now being proposed for HD directional drilling. So this is, again, another opportunity. If you're fighting a pipeline or you're concerned about fossil fuel infrastructure, this map can kind of open up additional advocacy tools. It's not going to have everything, but it's a kind of a good visual tool to figure out impacts.
Great. And I should just add that I think when we talk about these pipelines, there's really two sets of impacts, right? There's the catastrophic impacts of a spill or an explosion, but then there's just the everyday ordinary impacts that for every one of these pipelines, miles of land have to be cleared, and there's runoff pollution coming from the whole width of the pipeline. So that's another important thing for us to keep in mind.
And we are very grateful for the work of the folks who have been mapping and making public the data on the location of planned natural gas pipelines. It's not an easy thing to do. It's extraordinarily valuable, and it's been great for us to be able to incorporate at least some of those alongside the depiction of the existing pipeline network in the region.
Daniel Pascal asks, what role do you see for walking and biking trails and greenways to increase awareness, education, and access to the watershed? I guess I would say it seems just completely obvious. Your point that is well taken, that the more that we can have people walking along, biking along, boating along, or interacting with the waterway directly, the more awareness there will be. And so we really applaud the efforts of local conservation groups that are working to strengthen the network of trails and parks and bike pathways and so forth for just the reason that your suggestion, your question gets at. Claire asks, are there any contextual information like municipal boundaries and legislative districts that can be added? Claire, I'll just answer this because I know Tony and I went back and forth on this many times. We were struggling with exactly which legislative or other boundaries to include and how to do it in a way that wouldn't cause further confusion. So I don't have an exact answer for you. I just know we struggled with the question, and it's certainly something we're open to reconsidering in the future.
Yeah, I would say, Claire, that I'm with you. That all of those levels of context are very important, both for helping folks to locate themselves and and their communities on the map, and also for folks to be able to exert accountability on their leaders for actions that they might take to protect the basin. I'm fully with you. The challenges that we ran into with that were more of a practical nature than anything else. So I would love to see that kind of information in a future iteration of the map.
And similarly, there's a suggestion for adding MS4 boundaries and some data that look at environmental justice issues. So again, that's going to be a similar set of challenges, and we'll just have to figure out and prioritize, to the extent that we get more support to do another version of this map at some point in the future, we'll have to weigh all of these different priorities to figure it out.
And this is Doug O'Malley. I just wanted to reference Daniel's comment on the trail layer. One of the things that's not on the map right now is the circuit. And I think, one of the things, we obviously want people to kind of use the map and to figure out, where, where they're recreating and what are the threats to the watershed, where they are. The map obviously is accessible on a phone. That being said, it's not especially mobile friendly. But we obviously want to encourage people. People kind of know where they go, and so the more we can have people, try to look at where they recreate, before they go out, and then to kind of look for those, outfall pipe. I think that's our hope, to kind of open up, eyes. And obviously, we'd love to be able to add in more of these layers that folks are talking about.
Kristen asks whether we could add a layer of special protection waters. And Kristen, I guess I would just say, if we didn't make clear already, that that's high on my list of things that I would love for us to be able to do if we wind up doing a 2.0 version of this map. I would even go a step further, which would be to say, if among the Delaware River Watershed Initiative participants, if there are folks who are saying, look, here's a stream segment that is not currently designated for swimming or fishing, but we want a campaign to make it so. Or here's a waterway that is pristine and we should be petitioning to get it to be recognized as a Category 1 water in New Jersey, or a waterway of exceptional value in Pennsylvania, and so forth. I could easily imagine that we could perhaps put 20 or 30 of those high priority strategic waterways that we're collectively going to work in 2019 together to protect onto the map, so that then people could see the pollution threats we've mapped and help make a better case for protecting the waters we want to designate. So that's one of the ideas that we've been kicking around, and we'd be excited to see if we could work together to do it.
John, this is Nathan. This is Nathan here. I would offer also, for those that are seeking this additional data layers specific to the Delaware, I can think for most, not all, but for most of the layers that have been referenced as examples, I can think of web maps and online tools that are visualizing and presenting those layers for the basin. So I'm excited to use, for the folks that have, shared their information, given us the way to follow up with them, contact with them. We can share those links to those tools as at least an interim solution while we think about what more we can accomplish by integrating more data into this, specific integrated view.
Right. Thank you, Nathan. And this is Tony. I would echo that. That one of the benefits that we had in undertaking this project is, some of the incredible work that folks within the basin have already done to aggregate geographic information, in particular, on many of these problems. And so, there are certainly sources of information that are out there and other web tools that that are very valuable, and which I'm sure that some of you on this call are familiar with, but perhaps some others aren't. But there's a great deal of information that's out there already in other sources. I did want to touch on one, if we have a moment, and I realize that we're a minute over, on one of the other questions, which was whether we had made a decision to only include information when it was available across both states. Consistency across states was a significant issue. We resolved that as much as we could by using federal data sources, but I think this layer illustrates some of the differences between states pretty sharply. If you're looking at state-regulated hazardous waste sites, there are very different thresholds between the states on what is dealt with in a hazardous waste program. And so some of the comparisons that you might make across states can be fairly tricky. I think one thing that I would just, in addition to adding data to this map, I think, work that advocates can do to raise awareness of the need for high quality information that is regularly reported where it's required to federal databases, improves the quality of all of this and really helps to make all of this make sense to folks. So there's bringing more in, and there's also making what we have better.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like, so let me just close with a couple of thoughts. It sounds like there's all kinds of ideas that people have about things that maybe could be added to this map. I think Nathan's point about looking at other maps that are available is a point well taken, and we'll want to make sure that we're using our resources efficiently. But, if there is some community thought and excitement that having sort of one-stop shopping of being able to look at all these layers in one place is of high value, certainly that's something, a conversation that we're open to having. So that's one thing. The second thing, though, is I think our view is that this map, even in its current form, even with its imperfections and things that we weren't able to put in, is just an incredible wealth of information. And we hope that it will be useful in many ways this year and in the years to come. I think it should be useful in local fights. If there's a new polluting facility in your neck of the woods that wants to start discharging stuff, to be able to point on the map and look at all the cumulative impacts and overburdens, the overburden of all the existing pollution sources in your part of the watershed and upstream from that. I think it can be a powerful visual to make that case. I think that should we see a hurricane or dramatic flood coming to the Delaware River Basin, having the mapping of these facilities to show where catastrophic runoff pollution, accidents, and other major pollution problems could occur would be very helpful, and so forth and so on. So those are two thoughts. And then I guess I would just close by reemphasizing that none of this would have been possible if Nathan had not put his trust and the resources of the William Penn Foundation behind this ambitious project, almost 2 years ago. It's been a work in progress. We've been thrilled and privileged to be able to bring the map to this point, and we just can't thank William Penn Foundation enough for the resources to make it happen. So with that, let me just say, I would be thrilled to take other questions. I don't have anything immediately on my schedule. I imagine many other people probably have other obligations that maybe we've already cut into your 2 o'clock appointments. So I just want to be respectful of other people's time. But if there are any last burning thoughts or questions, we certainly, I'd be happy to stay on for a couple of minutes. And I think Tony and Doug and I would just encourage you to reach back out to us in the next, couple of days if you have other ideas as well. So just a couple last things coming up on the screen.
The question about, okay. John, I'm wondering if you have the slide from your presentation that has our contact information, if that might be, for those folks who do have to jump off,
Yeah.
if you could possibly, I will stop sharing my screen, but I know that some folks will probably want to be in touch with us. And so if it's possible for you to share that, that would be great. I'm going to need to sign off fairly soon myself. So
Yeah.
I want to just express deep gratitude for everybody who has joined us today, and I'm sure that we'll continue some of this conversation offline.
Great, Tony. I think what we have here are the links to the interactive map itself and to those fact sheets that Tony clicked through to as well. One fact sheet on industrial pollution, another on sewage, another on runoff pollution, and another on fossil fuels and mining. And then while we're here, I should mention, we do have one more document forthcoming on policy recommendations. Many of these core policy recommendations are already in the fact sheets, but we wanted to put together a more comprehensive policy recommendation document. Many of you have already seen a draft and have agreed to review that document. We're now just in the final stages of finalizing it and hoping to roll it out in the next few weeks. So I don't think there'll be any big surprises in that policy recommendations document, given the number of you that we've consulted and many others over the past year, but we will have a final comprehensive policy document as well. And then I think Tony was alluding to contact information, but I actually don't think we have it here.
Okay. I will read off mine. My email address is tony@frontiergroup, all one word, .org.
And I'm JRUM, as in Michael, P as in Peter, JRUMPLER @environmentamerica.org. And I think you all have Doug's email.
Yeah, and I just posted my email. It's DOMalley, DOMALLEY @environmentnewjersey, all one word, all spelled out, .org. And if folks just want to call me, if you find that easier, my cell is listed at 917-449-6812.
All right, with that, I think we're going to close. This has been great to walk through all of this. And again, we encourage you to just tinker around with the map, explore what's there. And we look forward to working with all of you for a clean and protected Delaware.